So in this, some things you should know about the video game industry. Just like when we are trying to target certain groups, sort of like when we're trying to target sports league fans. You would segment them by leagues first, so baseball and football and soccer and basketball fans, and then from there you would segment them again. So let's say we are Major League Baseball fans. Maybe I'm more of a National League fan, so we would segment even from there. We would say, well, now let's look at specifically the National League West and the Padres and Dodgers and Rockies and Giants. And then from there, let's segment again specifically to Padre fans and how do we market directly to those. So market segmentation analysis is the study of customers divided into smaller groups to understand their specific characteristics like behavior, age, income, and personality. It's easier for companies to advertise when they're marketing a smaller segment of customers. This way, each campaign can be highly targeted and precise to the characteristics of each group. How a company should showcase a product or service depends on which group they're targeting. So you've got to first of all think about gamers, like looking down here, looking at the total number one here, the total number of gamers, the gamers share the world's population. Video games are so incredibly big. You can see all of the different ways they're splitting this down. But I think number three here is really the most interesting one, in that 69% of people are playing games on their smartphone, which is so definitely evident now, especially with the abilities of the iPhone and all of that. But people are still playing on their desktop, PC, and laptop, which surprises me. I would think game consoles would be more important than a good desktop, PC, laptop. But that's not the case here. So when you can break these groups down specifically, you can then market specific products to that particular group and also figure out what it is that they want. I didn't know that I wanted Retro Bowl. I didn't know that, and they put it out there, and no one told me about it. I went on to Apple Games and just looked at the free games that were being offered, and I saw Retro Bowl, and I thought, I'll give this a try. I downloaded it, started playing it, and was instantly addicted to it. And so I think that these types of marketing opportunities, even with in my summer camp business, I market very differently to Plano area churches than I do maybe to Keller area churches. There's just different demographics. There's just different types of consumers in those places. They also, for me, get split down to what type of church they go to, whether they go to a Methodist church or a Baptist church. And that's more so because of just how the church operates and kind of some of their methods of when they have children's ministries and when they have VBS, and all of those things are all ways that I market segment my camps.
All games out there, look at, put a picture up here of action games and is that idle games, role-playing games, simulation games, sports games, strategy games. What are the most popular and why?
I think it's interesting that idle games is on this graphic, not because they aren't popular. I absolutely know they're popular. It's just not something that I necessarily play. So idle games being, those things like Clash of Clans, any sort of the puzzlers where you're trying to line stuff up and match them up and whatnot, something that's just sort of like a passive game, something you're doing while you're idle. And I think that just because of the nature of our world where you're sitting at a bus stop on your way home, whatever, you have some free time, you're going to boot up an idle game because you're idle effectively. But beyond that little kind of niche realm, I think that the games that we're seeing take off right now are number one, online games, online interactive games where players can be ranked and understand their skill cap on a larger basis. I think that's why we see so many popular battle royale games coming out right now, from starting with Fortnite a few years ago. Call of Duty got their Warzone battle royale game. We have Apex Legends as well now, where all of these people are playing in these super huge rooms of 100 to 200 people all trying to be the last man standing. And while I wish I could play these games a little bit more, I get so darn frustrated, honestly. Never coming out number one is really, really defeating at a certain point. But I understand why my students play it so much, because you do want to kind of be the best, so to speak, and keep trying to level up in a way. Beyond that, I also think, and we talked about this before, MOBA games are really popular right now, which would be a multiplayer online battle arena. This would be League of Legends, Valorant, Pokemon Unite is another new recent one as well, where you have a team of people, each person playing a specific role, trying to get to the enemy side and capture the base, capture the flag, do something along those lines. And even then, again, I think that also connects back to this idea of interactivity, of playing online with other people, and also being able to climb a ladder. All of those games I just listed have, anywhere from a Iron and Bronze League up to Diamond and Platinum, where you can spend a whole year of your life trying to climb in the ranks and try and be the best player you can be.
Niche markets, or niche markets, as people say, is defined as channeling all marketing efforts toward one well-defined segment of a population. A niche market does not mean a small market, but it involves specific target audience with specialized offerings. So, Mr. Holmes told me a bunch of games that he found to be niche games that were maybe played by a very specific group of people, maybe not the smallest group of people, but they really appealed to certain types of people. Like Mr. Lazos told me, he liked horror-based games, or those kinds of they get into that market, and then they even segment the market even more to get to a smaller market of who their direct people are. For me, my sports camps are marketed to all kids, but really it's kids that go to church. That's first market segmentation. Second market segmentation is that they're part of the children's ministry there, so that's a smaller market. And then the children's ministry kids who go to Vacation Bible School, which is even a smaller market. So now I know who my market is, and I design my entire program based on the after VBS sports camp kid who's a member of that church and is already involved in the children's ministry. Very, very specific niche market, but that is, to me, what you have to do in the marketing world to be successful.
Next up, it's MOBA, Multiplayer Online Battle Arena. In a MOBA, you control a single character in one of two teams. Usually, the goal is to destroy the opposing team's main structure with the assistance of computer-controlled minions that march forward along set paths. Player characters have a wide range of abilities and advantages at their disposal, all of which can be crucial for winning the game. MOBA games are all about perfect timing and strategy, so choosing a character with the right abilities is of utmost importance. You control only a single character, the hero or champion, who plays the pivotal role. As the game rages on, you level your hero up with skills and abilities and new different items in order to destroy the enemy team's fortress, all the while aided by the faithful minions. The prime examples of MOBA are Dota 2 and League of Legends, but if they prove a little intimidating, Smite is arguably more accessible. They're all great.
We've seen Martin Scorsese and Ridley Scott come out recently and say, Marvel movies are not real cinema. They're not great, okay? And they say just because you sell a bunch of tickets and people come to them doesn't mean that it's real cinema. Does the same thing apply in video games? Is it possible that those games that sell a ton are truly the best games, or is it that they sell the most because they're sort of popcorn flicky type games?
Yeah, the way I hear this question is, what video games are art in a way, this idea of giving them a certain level of reverence and respect. And right. This is completely opinion based. Let's admit this is all subjective from here on out. I don't think that all popular games are necessarily artistic video games. If we're talking about the ones that I've just listed, Fortnite, League of Legends, so on and so forth. Yes, they're extremely popular. They make millions of dollars every year, but they're not anything that necessarily strikes me as an immersive game where there's a story. I mean, if we're breaking down everything we've talked about, there's multiple parts that we're talking about, from graphics, from story to mechanics and everything else in between. I think a lot of these games figure out one of those things to do really well and constantly rebrand and remarket and reinvent themselves, whether it's Fortnite, where they're adding in new skins, new characters, new game modes, or any other online game where they're just simply patching it and trying to update the game so the balance of the game is more fair in the players' eyes. They're trying to actually make sure they're masters of one, but not necessarily taking care of all realms of video games respectively.
Have you ever wondered which video game genres are the most popular and the best selling? Today I'm going to run through some brand new data and dive into the evolution of the top 3 genres to pinpoint why they may be more successful than others. 12.9% of all games sold are role-playing games. RPGs can be traced back dozens of years, and time sure has changed them. The genre started with traditional tabletop RPGs like Traveller, D&D, and RuneQuest, but the history of role-playing actually began in 16th century Europe with improv theater. Board games came later, influenced by the character role-playing in these live performances. It seems silly, but that's really where it all began. And then we had party-based isometric RPGs like Baldur's Gate and Neverwinter Nights, followed shortly by class-based JRPGs such as Final Fantasy, and they took much influence from the rigid character systems in earlier role-playing games. It was the turn-based battle systems and world maps being the norms of RPGs, only to be then shadowed today by open worlds inspired by the very first Elder Scrolls game. Today, there are so many types of RPGs, from MMOs to Dragon Age Inquisition, The Witcher, and Fallouts, and top-down games like Diablo 3. But things have changed. The American audience in general seems to be gravitating towards games that feature real-time combat, whether it's cooldown-based, such as World of Warcraft, or free-form swordplay, such as The Witcher. We're moving away from Japanese-inspired traditional role-playing games with turn-based battle systems. But really though, what is a role-playing game these days anyway? The marketing term, "this game has role-playing elements," is extremely popular, usually defined with common norms such as skill trees, stat points, character development and customization, storytelling, or choice, as seen in games like Mass Effect. But action games can also have these elements too, all of them in fact, including The Last of Us and Uncharted. When you really break it down, they have more role-playing than most modern-day games that call themselves role-playing games. They check all the boxes. So, what makes an actual role-playing game? I think the real draw to role-playing games, regardless of what metric you use to define the game, has got to be story and characters. Many RPGs today are quite fantasized, both in terms of how we play them and the subject material or story. Games like Final Fantasy XV present worlds that are impossible to exist outside of being built from our imaginations. Giant flying dragons, shooting super scion lasers, to floating cities, magic, revival mechanics, to hairdos that defy gravity. These kinds of settings have the potential to be unrelatable, but then you have a game like Fallout 4, which is about people, even though the world has many fictional elements, from the enemies to the powers and the weaponry. I don't think role-playing games will ever be the top-selling genre though. They demand so much time and investment to learn about what's going on, to get through everything. It's a great genre, just not one for everyone.
The next genre we're covering is RPG, role-playing games. These are typically adventure games that usually incorporate three key elements. One, a specific main story and quest, and a bunch of smaller side stories and quests which expand the game's lore. 2. Character evolution or leveling, which sees you as the main character gain experience and unlocks a ton of new skills by completing quests and slaying foes and so on. And lastly, number 3, inventory management and crafting, essential to making progress in the game's world. These items include weapons, armor, healing items, magic, and so on. A perfect example of a recent RPG to get your feet wet is the Witcher franchise, especially The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, which was named the best RPG game of 2016. It's pang up to date and available on all platforms, and there's lots of deals out there for it. Next up is MMO, which stands for Massively Multiplayer Online. Even though most modern games can go online, MMO offers a significantly broader experience, as the MMO game world can be populated by thousands and even millions of players in a real-time space. Like RPGs, you can view the world first person or third person or from directly above. It's not the key identifier. MMOs are often mixed RPG elements, creating the hybrid known as MMORPG or Massively Multiplayer Online role-playing game. Now, here's where things can get a bit tricky, as there are some key differences between MMORPGs and MMOs. The first thing we should note is that all MMORPGs are MMOs, but not all MMOs are MMORPGs. Here's what we mean. An example of an MMO is Audition, a fun game where your goal is to be the best dancer. In it, you compete against other players in dance-offs, earning you points to level up and gain ranks. So far, so MMO. Now, the reason why Audition can be considered an MMORPG is because it does not take place in a fictional setting. You are represented by an avatar, but it's all meant to look like a real-life place. An example of an MMORPG would be the daddy of them all, World of Warcraft. In WoW, you create an otherworldly character and fight mythical monsters as you level up alongside or against friends or strangers, all in the imaginary world of Azeroth. It's this combination of fictional character and fictional world that makes it the perfect example of an MMORPG. So basically, if you're not sure whether a game is an MMO or an MMORPG, just ask yourself, does the game in question take place in a real-life setting, or is it set in a fantasy land? If it's the latter, then it's most likely an MMORPG.
Of the genres that you see here,
Mhm.
which one do you think is the most addictive? The most like, man, I cannot live without this. This is there one of these where someone could pick it up casually and just kind of play it, and there's one where it's like, look, I'm 12 hours tomorrow, I'm playing this game, and I can't put it down.
Sure, sure. That's hard to say. Of course, it comes down to personal taste. As far as just like addicting qualities, in my opinion, I would say role-playing games. Now, the caveat of that is those are a little more, they can be a little less approachable, although RPGs are, they're very highly funded these days by the big, huge, games companies. There's a lot of mainstream RPGs that are coming out, like your Assassin's Creed and stuff like that. I think those are the most addicting, the most kind of rewarding, I guess you can say, while also they kind of strike a decent balance between approachability, but also being good for people who don't want their hand held while they're playing a game. So
Okay. Interesting. So when it
Mhm.
comes to the different genres of games, which one do you think maybe is starting to lose fans a little bit? Is there any that you feel like, this had its day, it was big, and maybe it's fallen a little bit? And maybe what's some specific games in that genre?
let's see. Mm, I would say
You may have guessed it, but shooters, first-person shooters specifically, account for 27.5% of all video game sales. Why are so many people entranced by first-person shooters? It's fun to shoot things. Or maybe it's that human element, something psychological about being in the first-person space. It's kind of like when you read a book. There's a huge difference between the narrative in first or third person. First person is usually more immersive by default. First-person perspectives really draw you into the game. You're not controlling a character, you are the character. First-person games create that sense of player agency because the motor functions associated with both playing and being in a shooting game mirror our own lives. It's easy to get drawn into first-person games subconsciously because of perception theory. The effectiveness of your actions are visible and tangible, otherwise not as definite when controlling a third-person camera. First-person shooter worlds started off as mazes to inflate game length due to a lack of hardware memory, but as technology improved and evolved, the genre was able to take many new forms. You've got the modern military shooter, the Halos, the Destinies, stealth games like Dishonored, and of course, story-based fictional shooters like BioShock and Metro Last Light. Each subgenre caters to a niche audience, but ultimately, they all boil down to the same thing: gunplay. The modern-day first-person shooter comes with so many expectations these days: a feature-length campaign with hopefully cooperative play, a full multiplayer components with dedicated servers, detailed graphics, 60 frames per second standard, and downloadable content to extend the game's lifespan. Although there is no set standard, FPS games can bring together huge groups of people in games like Battlefield or Overwatch with competitive and team-based online play. All of that really started with Halo back in the Xbox days with co-op play and multi-console system link, which was just a blast. First-person shooters are inherently more visceral than third-person games, and with that comes the illusion that they are more detailed. After all, you can physically get closer to objects, textures, grass, NPC faces, and everything else, all of it adding to the immersion factor. But really though, first-person shooter games are just plain fun, and there are endless possibilities for the genre as a whole. So those are the 3 highest selling genres. Comment down below and tell me where you think the direction of these genres are going in the future.
Let's start with the easiest to spot, FPS, first-person shooter. FPS are characterized by real-time, fast-paced action which you see through the eyes of the character, hence first person. and you tend to do a lot of shooting in them, so yeah, FPS. There's debate over which was the first, but the one that really set the ball rolling was without doubt Doom, which also introduced multiplayer matches and overnight reset the bar. In fact, this format has become so popular that some developers don't really bother too much with single-player modes, putting the bulk of their energy into multiplayer modes. Examples of first-person shooters include Battlefield, Call of Duty, Destiny, Far Cry, Halo, Doom, and so on. Any one of those will give you a great idea of what FPS is all about.
I mean, if we look at shooters, if we think about like battle royales as shooters, like your PUBGs or your Fortnites or things like that, I don't think they're gonna like die or anything like that. But I do think, and the data that I've seen kind of is coming to bear this. There's ever so, what's the term? Dwindling returns on these types of games. They're very expensive to fund long term. You need a large player base to play them. Even just one round, you need 80 to 100 real people.
Right.
And I think the star's just kind of fading for some of those games. There's definitely no room for any more. Like you're not going to see another Fortnite. You're not going to see another game in that genre. The people who play Fortnite still play Fortnite. The people who play PUBG still play PUBG, and they're probably going to play it for a long time. But as far as a whole genre, I would probably say battle royales are the ones that are really kind of dying out the fastest.
Similar to MOBA are RTS, real-time strategy games, which follow a similar path but have key differences too. The object in an RTS is usually also to conquer an enemy by strategic maneuvering and warfare, but on a much larger scale. The maps can be huge. RTS are all about building armies, maintaining an economy, and creating perfect defenses to protect your dominion and against enemy troops. In RTS games, single characters don't play an important role, and you have to think much more in terms of whole armies, nations, and empires. The most notable examples of an RTS are Warcraft 3 Reign of Chaos and Age of Empires, but a nice one to dip your toe in the water is Rise of Nations.
Action games account for 22.5% of all video game sales, and if I can be honest, it's my favorite genre. Back when games were less complicated, action games became really popular because they introduced mechanical challenge. Action games are about the relationship between the hands on the controller and the mind of the player, because it was all about mechanics and challenge. In action games, you're not thinking as much as you are reacting to things. Many action games of the past were built on this concept of mechanical challenge to offer enough replayability to justify their cost. But action games have evolved so much. My favorite game of all time is The Last of Us. It's one of those games that takes a slower approach to action by incorporating elements from other genres, such as real-time crafting from survival games and cutscenes first introduced by JRPGs and games like Half-Life. It's really a genre where anything is possible. The Just Cause series in open world destruction, LEGO Superheroes, Max Payne and Bullet Time, how Tomb Raider brought puzzles to the table, Resident Evil in the action horror subgenre, GTA, the Arkham games. The possibilities are really endless.
So those were some of the best known and most talked about Alphabet games, and hopefully you're a little better able to spot one from another. More and more, of course, you'll get different elements of each rolled into one as studios try to combine audiences and game styles. Destiny is a good example of this as a sort of FPS RPG, and also Borderlands with its FPS action and RPG loot system. Another unusual example is Rocket League, which follows the basic rules of football but replaces human players with racing cars. It's a simple yet amazing concept which serves as a prime example that hybrid games can be pretty awesome if executed correctly. So we hope we've answered some of the questions that might have been bugging you. If you have any more questions on any other genres we forgot to mention, by all means let us know and we'll be